Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you at Astana Finance Days. And today is the final day, and I would like to congratulate for those who survived for a third day. So today we would be discussing if Web3 is the future of internet, what's the role of Kazakhstan, and how we can build a Web3 startup hub in Kazakhstan. So first of all, let me introduce to our participants of our discussion. So myself is, I am Asel Janasova. I am a Vice Minister of Trade. Today we have a special guest, Geoffrey C. He is a CEO, co-founder of Poco Fund, a DAO creation and management platform building a new kind of company structure for the digital Web3 world. He worked extensively with legal to build these structures with both technical and legal engineering, and he's a YC alumni as well. Orion, he's a general partner of Orange DAO, a VC DAO comprised of YC founders, and has a large and active community of YC founders investing in Web3 technologies. Hector, founder and general partner for Nasta, one of the leading VCs in LATAM and an operator turned investor. He's building out the Web3 ecosystem in Latin America. And finally, Yakub, he's a director of fintech division at Astana Financial Services Authority, our regulated AAFC. So thank you so much for everyone taking time this morning participating in our session. And to open up the session, I would like to hand over the first word to Geoffrey. Geoffrey, so can you tell about, for most of us, so what is Web3 technologies and how Web3 startups scale globally? What are the DAOs and blockchain native organizations, and why are people excited about them?
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a lot of questions at one go. So thanks very much for it. So maybe I just give a brief introduction about Poco and what we do. So as Asel mentioned, we build these things called DAOs, and we help people manage them. DAOs stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. The way we like to think of it is more that these are blockchain native companies. So companies where their operating system sits on the blockchain. And in order to do it, they generally issue something called tokens. You've probably heard about them. And these tokens are used in a number of ways. So these tokens are used as utility tokens, as a medium of exchange. They are used for governance. So people use them to vote to make decisions around what an organization or a group or community needs to do. And they are used for also for fundraising purposes. Sometimes people are kind of, when they're creating a new thing, they issue tokens in return for capital to work on their projects. So generally, that's how we think about the entities that we build. And I think Web3 is interesting in a number of ways. So the first aspect is that, I think for many countries where the market size is small, Web3, by disintermediating the platforms, enable people to access a much larger market. So I think that's why we think it's exciting. We've seen companies in Vietnam that have successfully scaled up, this gaming company scale up across many different countries in ways that traditional digital business have not been able to do without access to key platforms that normally sit in Silicon Valley. The second reason why we think Web3 is interesting is because we have seen very successful fundraisers, kind of true crowdfunding. I think for ecosystems that tend to be weak in terms of startup equity fundraising, it's a different approach to the market. People are able to crowdfund and scale their business far more quickly. So we look at things like Constitution DAO, within 1 week being able to raise $40 million to buy the US Constitution. And a lot of this are small checks. So I think it's a, it's a different kind of go-to-market path. I think the last part is around very cost-efficient ways to distribute ownership among a community. So I think in this space, we've seen people try to include their users into the way they build the product. And in order to do it, they basically give tokens to a large number of members of the community and get them to go out to be advocates for the product. So it's very different business models built on the Web3 rails. And I think, more broadly, Web3 is about decentralization. We have decentralization across many aspects, things like ownership, things like data, things like teams and customers. And I think this disintermediation, is the foundation on which Web3 is built, and the potential for people to directly interact with each other through the internet rather than going through central platforms. And I think Web3 is about, the use of these blockchain technologies to re-architect the internet around peer-to-peer transactions.
Thank you, Geoffrey. My next question would be from the investor's point of view. Orion, maybe you can, first of all, introduce yourself. Where are you based now? And maybe it's too early or too late at your end. And thank you so much, first of all, for taking your time and connecting to our session. Orion, in your view, how are investors investing in Web3 technologies? What excites them? And what's the future of DAOs? Probably one of the questions I would really want to ask you. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I think Orion might have got the time wrong because I might have gave him the wrong time.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about it.
So, Hector, are you online?
I am. Hello, everybody.
Good. So, sorry, we will wait Orion to connect. But while Orion will connect, Hector, maybe you can tell, first of all, if you can introduce yourself from investors' point of view, why VCs are investing to Web3 technologies, why that excites them, what is the future, so you can direct our startups to kind of plan for the future.
Well, first, introduce myself. I'm Hector Sepulveda. I'm Mexican, born and raised in Mexico, 43 years old. I'm a father of three kids. Very, very honored to be here. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. And happy to talk a little bit more on the philosophical side of your question, if you will. I think I won't go that technical. But I think what we see in emerging markets is that there is so many talent out there looking for, to mean something, to build something, to create something. And in our region, such as Latin America and many other regions of emerging markets in the world, there are a lot of gatekeepers, lots of privileges around access to capital, access to opportunities. And Web3 is, as of today, I think, the most democratized, the most accessible way to actually build a true meritocratic society. In a sense, you have people that can get access to many tools, funding, networks, and many, many things through, several Web3 tools. Just to give you some few examples. We recently invested in an amazing company called Modak, which is basically a Web3 platform for kids. So it's empowering them to actually, build what they want to build. They don't have to wait till they go to college and high school and meet the right people and have the right backing and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a different path that I think young people will have to walk from now on. It's going to be more meritocratic, which I think is always good for our world, more open, and they will be able to create many things. So I think those are the fundamentals of Web3. The fundamentals are, it basically empowers creators. And if you can do that in any aspect, like what Geoffrey's doing is basically building the infrastructure to actually do this, in a structured and formal way, in a sense. And so many tools are missing out there in the world, so many problems that can be solved with this, and so many people eager to actually mean something and just contribute to our world in many ways. So that's at least our view as investors, a very philosophical, even romantic way, if you will. But I think the fundamentals are what drives everything here.
Thank you, Hector. Thank you very much. My next question would be to Geoffrey. Geoffrey, in your view, what's the trend, what's going on in the DAOs world? So what are different countries are doing from the policymaking perspective, from the startups, so who is very active currently in the space?
Yeah, so I think we've seen DAO treasuries grow from, I think if you say go back to prior to 2021, in terms of participation in DAOs, in terms of the treasury managed by DAOs, it was pretty small, prior to 2021. So I think, DAOs go back all the way to 2016, when the first DAO came out of the Ethereum project. And then, you say kind of before 2021, it's like, I think probably the number of participants in DAO was probably at most 10, 20,000 people. And then last year exploded to 1.4 to about 2 million people. So I think there's a lot of growth there. DAOs is a very, very loose terms. A lot of them, it's kind of a governance layer on top of a protocol. So many companies do issue tokens, but have not really thought a lot about the governance side of things yet. So it's kind of fairly new, but I think there's been a lot of discussion and debate around it. We've seen a few countries pass legislation to recognize DAOs as legal entities and enable them to participate in commerce, sign contracts, and do all these things in the same way that a company can do. And I think some places that come to mind are Wyoming and Tennessee in the US that have former DAO legislation. And basically Marshall Islands have issued a former DAO legislation. But most DAOs currently are incorporated in places that do not have a formal DAO legislation. So I think, I like to think of it as like you have the A, B, C, D of DAO incorporation, B being BVI, C being Cayman, D being Delaware, and potentially increasingly Dubai. And A hopefully will be the Astana International Financial Center.
Thank you, Geoffrey. So Hector, my next question would be, what kind of things you will be looking when you invest? So say we will have a Web3 community startups, and we will come to you and ask, would you invest to these startups? What you would be looking, what kind of things would be interesting for you in order to get investment from your VC?
So we're an early stage investment fund, again, fundamental based. So we were looking to, problem solving at the core in big markets, exorbitant value propositions, just not looking to make things different, just making them better, very straightforward, very aggressive, of course, within an ethical framework, but very aggressive approach to making things better in a sense. Specifically in Web3, we believe you could actually make everything all over again much better. That's what I think Web3 enables. I think we've seen a phase of massive speculation around Web3. We're looking at it right now. The first available tools to us was crypto. What is the usefulness of it? Many people ask around, why is it useful? How does it add value to this, and that? Many people oversee the actual entertainment value that crypto brings, speculation like, the stock market, for example. But deep down, I think it's a great spearhead move because now we're actually seeing things that solve actual problems. DAOs, for example, great example. We're looking at many other things, like just to give you a few examples that we like a lot is education, empowerment in education. One thing that we believe is we live in the era of radical knowledge. It's not about teaching somebody, it's not about one person transmitting knowledge to another. Everything's accessible. Every kid in the world can access information right now. He can answer any question that he has right now. There's so many information out there, they just need to manage it. And we need to teach people how to manage all this information. It's a completely different kind of education. This is a huge opportunity, for example, for Web3. Another is creation, and monetization. We're seeing it in, I think, not so much in Very productive way right now, more of a speculative way, but all the play to earn, for example, video games, seeing these very young kids creating things either from avatars, NFTs, or a whole video game, a whole experience, whatever you may call it in a digital way, is actually pretty amazing. And there's a willingness to pay around it. You know, people are actually willing to pay for these video games. They're willing to pay for these creations, doesn't matter how ridiculous they might sound. If people are willing to pay for it, I think we need to recognize and assimilate that we live in this reality and it matters. And I think there are many other ways. We're looking at opportunities, for example, in agriculture, where we're seeing actually Web3 tools being extremely useful for farmers to actually have just no gatekeepers, completely, no more intermediaries in their value chains, just being able to access everything at all times in a very transparent way. So anything that has lots of intermediation around it, for example, I think is a great opportunity for Web3. Anything that knowledge or decision-making is centralized, that's a great opportunity for Web3. If there is anybody thinking or proclaiming that there is a truth, centralized truth around it, again, a great opportunity for Web3 to actually, put in an alternative truth to it, So I think there are so many things out there that might not be very obvious right now. Actually, we have a saying in Nazca, which means when everybody has the same problem, nobody actually sees a problem. So we need to actually ask ourselves what we take for granted at some point. And I think great ideas and great projects will emerge from that.
Thank you. That's so true, actually. The end of April this year with Geoffrey, this is how I met Geoffrey, by the way. We met Eric Schmidt in Singapore. And when I asked him, what is the future of technologies? And he said, definitely Web3. So all the countries, they need to prepare their future generation to adapt on Web3 technologies. That's certainly his prediction. But yes, I would agree with you. So my next question to Jakub. Jakub, maybe you can tell a bit more about what Kazakhstan is doing on the crypto space. So we know that we are very famous on mining. A lot of people know about the Kazakhstan through mining lenses. Or some of the crypto exchanges started to register at AIFC, but what's the what is the future plan, and what is, in your view, should we really regulate DAOs? What kind of framework we should use to attract and be home for these DAO startups?
Oh, okay. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to speak today. And in relation to your question, I think definitely crypto-type businesses should be regulated, because the practice shows that this type of businesses carry a lot of risks for investors. On the other hand, we see that retail investors, they become more resilient to market risk day by day, because this direct access to these crypto markets, they make them more immutable to all the negative factors that is happening in the space. Nevertheless, I think the regulation at a level of principles should be there, and the most important thing that it should be harmonized across all jurisdictions, because if you have different types of regulation around the world, it creates unnecessary jurisdictional arbitrage, and some countries will just concentrate the enormous amounts of crypto businesses, while others will suffer. And if the regulations are not streamlined, so there will be a lot of jurisdictional questions as to how to enforce some types of regulations. So in terms of Kazakhstan, I think, yes, mining was very, and still is very popular in Kazakhstan, in part because there was a very low cost of electricity. But as far as I know, this is starting to change. So, and also mining across the world probably you heard the news that like miners are offloading all their equipment, especially the GPU cards, and all the gamers are now happy that they can finally get their GPUs on Amazon or the second markets. So I think yes, mining is important, but with this trend of moving from proof of work to proof of stake, I think proof of work and mining as we know it will lose its competitiveness, if you wish, and we should think about what we have to do as a country past. So I think one of the important things at this moment is to regulate the transactional side of crypto market, and this is what we have been focused on doing for the past year, and I think next year we'll be dealing with that as well. But I think it's also important that community and like-minded people in Web3 space, they jumpstart the conversation about what else can we do in this space. So before I met Geoffrey, before I got acquainted with you, like DAOs were very distant from a regulatory perspective, at least in Kazakhstan. But now I think at least we have to talk about it and have conversations like this to understand where are those people, what are they talking about, and what can we do together. So the main thing in Web3, I think the notion of decentralization is very important, and so is the decentralization of regulatory powers. So before it shouldn't come like all the regulatory materials and regulatory advice shouldn't come in a centralized way from one single entity, and this what was happening for the last decades all around the world. So regulators should also talk with the market and identify the points that are jurisdiction specific. So I think in relation to DAO, there aren't much of a regulation around the world. Geoffrey already mentioned most of them, but there are some differences, of course. For example, in Wyoming, they enacted this supplement to their limited liability company regulation, and like DAOs that have legal wrappers in Wyoming, they get the same. The members get the same protections as shareholders in the classical LLC. But what is interesting, they created this hierarchy of legal documents in DAO. So first of all, it's a smart contract. Then it's I think it's an operational agreement, and at the last point, it's the constitutional documents of this DAO. Whereas in a traditional sense, constitutional documents are always prevailing before anything else. So, and building on this example from Wyoming, I think it's very important to understand if the smart contract is the top document in a DAO from a legal perspective, so who bears the responsibility if something goes wrong with this contract? So I think the regulators should ask themselves whether they should over-regulate DAOs, and this will have a negative impact of this development of this space, especially in Web3, or whether allow them to self-regulate. And if we draw parallels with the social networking sites, and they have been active for quite a long time, and they were happy with self-regulating themselves. Of course, there are a number of laws being enacted, at least at the EU level. I'm talking about Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. But I think over-regulating DAO will not bear any fruits. So, and also one parallel was with the social networking sites, and this is very important with DAOs because usually unincorporated DAOs, they interact on Discord or Twitch or other social networking sites. So if we compare this to retail investors in the financial sphere, so on one hand we have these social networking sites users who are basically it's a wild west at Facebook or Twitter or Twitch and Discord. Somebody can come and say whatever they want to you, and you have to accept it because you have limited means of recourse. Of course, there are like community guidelines that you have to follow and behave yourself, etc. But the same is happening with DAOs. So if there are some community guidelines that you have to follow, and you have to assess as a retail investor, if you're talking about investment DAOs, for example, you have to assess independently how much risk are you being exposed to, and whether this asset should worth your time and investment and your money, basically. This is what I think about the regulation in relation to AIFC. I think it's important. I am aware of some exercise that's going on now. So a founder of a DAO is trying to register an entity in Kazakhstan. So this will provide some gap analysis. I think what is missing in the AIFC in relation to DAO incorporation. And once we know that, I think we can move forward with doing something about that and creating this Web3 hub in Kazakhstan. And I think Kazakhstan and AIFC and also the national jurisdiction as well has very much of potential of creating this space because we have the community, we have the people who are willing to help this community. I'm talking about VCs or other investors. And also, we have quite friendly regulators, both in AFC and in the national jurisdiction. So, and most importantly, we have internet. So, combining all of this, I think we can come up to some positive results and making the Astana Financial Interest Center the A of what you said. Yeah, that's pretty much.
Thank you, Jakub. Certainly, I really strongly believe that it's our opportunity with zero investment to be innovative regulator because we won't be on the top of innovative countries. And our opportunity is through the innovative regulation because we won't stop this development of Web3 technologies. And actually we started with Geoffrey to find out whether certain our corporate rules will fit to DAO companies. And none of them will fit because the whole decentralization concept doesn't work with our current rules. So we started to look at what's the identification number, BIN, IN, doesn't really work for this type of companies. So whole the tokenization economy will need to have new rules to be set up at the regulatory level. So I believe that we need to create clear game plan for this type of companies because the investors, they need protection. Startups, they need clear rules to operate. They want to pay taxes as the same traditional companies. So why not to create that kind of ecosystem over here? And I guess that will be our goal to work on in the near.
Yeah, if I may add, I only mentioned Wyoming as an example, a jurisdiction example, but there are also the Marshall Islands, which have separated DAOs and as a separate entity. So it's not, it's similar to LLC, but it's called differently. But also, I think in Switzerland there is a model of ownerless corporations that also fit the model of DAOs. And at this point, I think all regulators are trying to shoehorn, so to say, the existing regulations onto DAO, like apply them onto DAOs. But I think it's a good point to start. I understand it wouldn't happen immediately Like somebody wants to incorporate DAO, and yes, here you are, you have your regulation. It's very difficult to do because DAOs, same as crypto markets, DAOs being part of it carry some of the risks. So if for example, we take it's a matter of a couple of weeks back, the Solent matter. So yes, DAOs are very democratic in their nature, so people vote for, you can put forward whatever proposal you want and vote for it. And sometimes these votes can be unfair. So you have to deal with that risk. You also have to deal with the, I think one of the biggest risks is the cybersecurity, because Web3 space heavily relies on Web2 infrastructure. And sometimes Web2 infrastructure is not very resilient to cyber attacks. And once this happens, there is also risk of people losing money. And going back to what I said previously, if it's the smart contract that is put on the top of the hierarchy at DAOs, then who should the regulators or even the investors or members of this DAO pursue? And there are some court cases pending right now. I think one of them is BZX before the US court, and I think it haven't been finalized yet. But
yeah, it's still
yeah,
ongoing.
and we will see what the court will decide. And I think it will be very like landmark decision for DAO development in general. But also, I think there was something else, but I couldn't remember. So there are a lot of risks. But what I'm saying is that yes, DAOs are a good thing, but there is also risks, and we have to take them into account.
Yeah.
Geoffrey, maybe you would like to add on this?
Yeah, I think having a pathway for DAOs, I think a regulatory pathway, right, for DAOs to be recognized, an innovative pathway, and something that's agile, taking into consideration that we are at the early phases of learning about the technology, this kind of entities, and kind of need to see them in practice so that we can actually learn about what are the risks and how to mitigate them. I think that's important. The points of regulation, I think in this space, I think generally focus around the exchanges, the crypto fiat rails, and I think that's generally should be the case, right? I think DAOs as an entity, there are many different kind of DAOs. Part of them are belonging to different kind of industries, and maybe the regulation should be focused around the fact of, what are they building, right? Are they, say, a DeFi protocol, and is there regulation for a DeFi protocol? Then they should be regulated as such, versus saying that, all DAOs are in nature financial instruments, which is not normally the case. At least that's how I view it. But I think just in terms of Astana being a great hub, I think having that clear pathway for people to experiment, to try and to create something first, and then kind of building the framework around it, I think that's important. The second point, I think, is being Astana, starting with the letter A, I think is already a great advantage. We're putting a report together with Baker McKinsey on DAO incorporation around the world. So Astana automatically goes to the top because it starts with the letter A, and then you have all the other countries coming after.
Thank you, Geoffrey. So we know that Portugal, Vietnam is taking lead on Web3 developer community, and with Geoffrey, we decided to just drop a note and headhunter. We're hiring a Web3 developer, and we put the kind of great salary, but no one actually came back to us. So what's your view? How we should create future Web3 developer startups in Kazakhstan, or in the region at least? Where we should start? I know you have experience in driving education in North Korea. And what are the key points we need to consider, or tips to drive education in this area?
So I think the main context I have is comparing, so I went to Vietnam in 2016. Vietnam has the highest crypto adoption in the world for a number of reasons, sometimes because of failure of institutions, not always good policies. But I think the comparison is just that in Vietnam, because they are very connected with the global startup ecosystem, both in Southeast Asia, that's kind of an emerging startup hub, as well as to projects elsewhere because of outsourcing work. So a lot of developers have experience in the space, and they understand the terminology, the concept, and they have built in that space. And I think that's very valuable, right? So we hired developers who have built exchanges, wallets, smart contracts, and the learning curve is a lot lower. I think my experience here is that it's a much more nascent startup ecosystem. So when we reach out, we did a few community events to talk about Web3. First question was always like, what is Web3? And then blockchain is still not, people have not really worked with the tech stack around blockchain as much as, say, in some other places that have more exposure. I think Russia actually has a lot of exposure working on blockchain. US, obviously, a lot of Eastern European countries have experience building on it. And I think there needs to be ways to connect the talent that's emerging here to working with global projects so they see what's being done outside, and they are able to pick up the programming languages and the experience building on the tech stack. So I think that's critical. I think it's how do you plug this ecosystem into a global ecosystem, something that's very international.
Thank you. Hector, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, okay, I'm just checking. So hopefully that's interesting discussion for you. Can you tell a bit in terms of the VC perspective, how we should develop VC culture, attraction of investment? It doesn't matter it's Web3 or not. So what countries should do in order to bring companies like you to the region? Because most of the time people, they have Europe, US and Asia, and most of the time they forgot about the Central Asian region. So in your point of view, what government or the region as its own should do in order to attract you guys?
Great question. Latin America was very lucky because basically it was in the same time zone as the US, and that made a lot of sense for them. Actually, it's actually something way more important than people think. I think the drivers are, you need to measure a little bit how many early stage companies are emerging. So you need to build it from the bottom up. You need to build the incubators, you need to build the connections and the partnerships with several people that go into Kazakhstan and basically are willing to partner up in many ways. That could be prestigious incubators, that could be many things. You need to build trust around the industry, and that doesn't necessarily mean results. That means specifically just being open and transparent about risk and how that risk is being managed. Latin America was a little bit very difficult to take this off because people were overselling things. They were not being transparent about results. They were not being transparent about opportunities and stuff like that. The moment that things became transparent and open, at some point, people are accountable for their own decisions, and they'll see a great market that's booming with amazing talent and the basic infrastructure to make it happen, and they'll start to take risks. In the case of Mexico, it started with a government program that basically leveraged private capital. So for example, if you wanted to build a fund, the government would put, 1-to-1 dollar per dollar. You need to raise $1 in the private market, and then just, they would put up another dollar. And it would be not as a grant, it would be basically just pay them back, and they would forgo for all the profits in favor of the investors. So it was actually pretty interesting. When that happened, there were many failures, but the ones that actually worked really well. And you need that. You need that halo effect. You need that local winner. You need that key opinion leader, that one guy or that one company that actually is extremely successful. And once you have that, you see the key employees of that company saying, wow, I'd like to do this as well. So they start to do it as well. And they need capital to do it. So you start to see this multiplier effect going on. It's kind of slow at the beginning and suddenly just takes off. And it takes off so fast that nobody knows what hit them. That happened in Latin America. We went, like in Mexico, we went from, I'm just going to give you estimates, but we went from $50 million invested in the country in venture capital to 1.4 billion in 1 year. It just exploded. And then the last part of it is you have the incubators, you have that infrastructure, you have the government participating. Of course, the government needs to help in anything that has to do with, fiscal easiness, anything that will help international investors say, hey, I'd love to invest here. Stuff like that. And then, suddenly it comes the mid-market, like you see the Series A guys coming on board, or you see larger funds growing in Kazakhstan that they could invest in Series A. And suddenly you see all the, big guys coming over to Kazakhstan, investing in the Series B, the growth capital, and taking these companies global. Another thing that I would ask in Kazakhstan is my market big enough to sustain, whatever initiative you have? Like, for example, in Israel, they asked that question and the answer was no. So they need to export, they need to think globally. And that's not bad, it's not good or bad, it's just different. And Israel was, hey, I can't remember, like 8 million people, I think, and suddenly, they need an international market. They need to create things that will solve everybody's problems. I think in Kazakhstan, you have a little under 20 million people, if I remember correctly. And it seems a pretty good market in a sense. You have a pretty good high GDP per capita. So, but the region around it, it's actually very interesting. So collaboration with your region is amazing. In Latin America, we were lucky enough that most of all of Latin America except Brazil, we all spoke Spanish. So that helped a lot. What do you guys share in common in the region? Is it language? Is it culture? Is it certain customs or way of doing business? That's where you have to actually look at it together and try to build something. Think of it in terms of cities, not countries. Like when Uber came to Latin America, they didn't think about, I'm going to Mexico and then to Colombia and then to Argentina. They thought, I'm going to Mexico City because it's the largest city. And then, but they're already in Mexico, so normally people think, hey, I'm going to go to the number 2 and number 3 city in Mexico. And they said, why would I do that? I'm going to go for number 2 city in Latin America, which is, for example, Buenos Aires or Peru, Lima in Peru, completely different countries. Just these kind of business models are more of urban centers than they actually are in countries. So if your, borders are reasonably passable from a business standpoint, you could make that happen. Just take a look at it as a region, a group of big, amazing urban centers, and that actually could work. Sorry about this big monologue, but that's a little bit of our experience.
Thank you so much, Hector, for deep advice. Thank you so much. And finally, Geoffrey. So Geoffrey has been in Kazakhstan for 9 days today. So my question, his first time, my question would be, what did you love most from Kazakhstan? So we have online session, and I guess a lot of international people watching this session, and they don't know about Kazakhstan. Maybe you can, in short, describe what you have seen and what's different from the perspective when you just read outside and being here physically. And what would be your advice to government, to people, to drive Web3 technologies in the region?
Yeah. So I have to admit, before I came to Kazakhstan, when we first met in Singapore, so it came on the map because I had a friend who was teaching at Nazarbayev University, which is just across the road. He's from Singapore, he's a professor from Singapore, and he comes here to teach every summer. So he was telling me like, hey, there's great talent, and there's a migration of talent because of the war happening in Europe to Kazakhstan. So he said, hey, you should check it out. Then we met in Singapore, and you're telling me that, there's all these interesting things that the government is trying to do to promote the tech industry. There's a national crypto strategy here. And it kind of really piqued my interest, although I honestly didn't have kind of much of an image of Kazakhstan before I came. So when I first came here, I was just like, oh, it just really surprised me that the infrastructure is very well developed. Astana to me looks a bit like Dubai. Almaty to me feels a bit like an Eastern European country. So I think it's wonderful. Hopefully I'm very excited. The weather has been amazing. I've not been here in winter, so major disclaimer. I've heard the winters here get a little bit chilly. But I think so far, I think it's been amazing to see, especially how there seems to be a determination to be innovative, to carve out a space and a brand for AIFC and Kazakhstan in the tech scene globally. And to take some risks and be innovative in the area. And I think that's, to me, one of the biggest things, right? I think if you are not a big name in the global tech or startup ecosystem, I think you have to do something more innovative, take more risks to stand out in the space. So I think that's one of the first things that I hope to see, and I think is happening. The other part is just being international, right? Having that global orientation. I think that's a question that, of kind of how people think about what role AIFC would play in the tech ecosystem. Is it a regional hub? Is it a global hub? And I think if they make that decision on, say, we want to be one or the other, then a lot of the processes and activities kind of would follow through from just that overall positioning.
Thank you so much. And finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending the session. Thank you, Geoffrey, for coming. And we hope to see you next time again and bring you more community to Kazakhstan. And from the government perspective, I would certainly say that we will be working towards creating right ecosystem for the players, because the future is not behind the big tech companies. Future is behind the new startup companies around Web3 technologies, because the decentralization will come. Metaverse is driving these trends in changing how we perceive the world of technology. So we will be working with the community, Web3 community, to create right regulatory environment to be probably not first but second home for Web3 companies. So that's my final word, and I wish everyone nice rest of the day. And thank you so much for attending. Hector, thank you so much for your time connecting from Latin America. Hector, are you there? Cannot see you.
Yes, I'm so grateful, and reach out anytime. We're more than happy to help, and I'm really looking forward to meeting in person and getting to know your surely beautiful country.
Thank you so much, and I will invite you to visit our beautiful country. So we'll work on that, to bringing you and to show you Kazakhstan in the next following months. And Orion, unfortunately, he couldn't join, but thank you once again for connecting.
Very happy and very honored. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.